Okay, well, I'm David Starkman, uh, and I'm talking to you from beautiful downtown Culver City on the site of part of the old MGM backlot is where we live in the USA. Um, and as you already heard, I'll be talking about stereo pair illustrated books, brief history. And before I start, I'll say, well, you're all familiar with anaglyphs, and anaglyphs are a great and easy way to present 3D. Uh, they're they've got a lot of advantages. You can, in a book, for example, you can have a picture of the full size of the page. Uh, cheap glasses that are flat to include, but the first stereo pair book I think we probably ever ran into was called the Stereo Realist Manual. Even though it's called the Stereo Realist Manual, it's actually a book, and it had, I'll be showing you some pictures, but it came with a viewer, and it has both black and white and full color side-by-side pairs. And both Susan and I like this format because unlike the anaglyph, you don't have the retinal rivalry that is inherent. And for full color images, they are truly full color. And while full color anaglyph can be achieved, there's always a compromise to it. Anyway, I'll see if I can figure out sharing the screen here, and give me a second to set up. Let's see. Oh, hold on. Sorry about this. 1 second. This is trickier than Zoom for doing this. All right. Oops. Sorry. All right. Are you seeing the picture of this book?
Yes.
Okay, let me go full screen. Okay. So are you all seeing a book with a stereo image on it?
Yes.
Okay. I'll just mention everyone else. The one problem with this, I can't see myself when I'm presenting. So I feel a little bit blind. All right. So this is a picture of from a book called Tenerife, An Astronomer's Experiment, that was published in 1858. And as far as I know, this is the first book ever to have stereo pairs included in the book. And do you see my cursor when I do this?
Yes.
Okay. Just want to know if I can use that. Okay. And I'll be alternating, for those of you that don't have viewers or can't preview, I'll be alternating between this and an anaglyph version for each picture. There's the anaglyph. So there was no viewer included with the book, and the pictures themselves were like albumin, I believe albumin prints that were hand pasted in. The publisher printed an outline for where the prints were supposed to go, and I guess that provided a good guideline for whoever had to paste them in by hand. So that was in 1858. This is that same book, and as I said, it didn't come with a viewer, but within a year, in 1859, stereoscope maker Smith, Beck, and Beck made a stereoscope especially for viewing prints in books. And this is one of those viewers this is from our own collection. And I'm especially fond of this viewer because, to the best of my knowledge, there has never been another book stereoscope that incorporates all the features that are in this one viewer from 1859. Besides having excellent achromat lenses, and a focusing feature. You rest it on the page and you can focus it. Over here, if you can see let me go to the anaglyph version. In this area, that's a mirror for reflecting light back down onto the page. And the septum between it is frosted glass to help reduce any shadow that might have been falling on the image. So I think this is an amazing viewer that has never been, nothing like it's ever been made since. And this is it again. You could also swing around these two little tabs and also use it to put a normal stereo print into. Oh, and the achromatic lenses, I think they're slightly offset. You can rotate them to adjust for different center-to-center distances of the image. So that's Smith, Beck, and Beck viewer from 1859. So although this is not a book, in 1871, J. Fletch Woodward patented a design for a stereoscopic album. And obviously this same design could incorporate into a book. And this is what an actual album looks like. And this is from our own collection. And I'm sure there are others out there, but this is only one of two that I know of. This is what it looks like opened up. And this is a close-up of the title page of 1871. And on every page, there's a place to slip in a stereo view. And I couldn't resist putting in this one of me and Susan from 100 years ago. And it's two-sided. So this the lens panel slides in and out on a tongue that sticks into a slot in the edge of the book. So when you've looked at one side of the pages, you can flip the viewing panel around and move to the other side. And now this, in 1876, I think is, to me, one of the most important books in the history of stereo books. It's called Gems of American Scenery of the White Mountains. And this is on near the title page, an instructional photo showing you how to use the book. And the reason to me that's important, it's the first book to incorporate a viewer into the design of the book. And it's on a flap that this woman is holding and looking at the stereo image facing her. And this is what the actual book itself looks like. And the other thing that I find very important about this book is rather than pasted in stereo actual photos, these were printed in a very, very fine screen printing process called the artotype process, which I believe is a type of calotype, and it's virtually dotless. And one advantage to this is the pasted in old photos, like in the Tenerife book, they tend to become very faded and whatever. Over 100 years later, this is a printing process. So over 100 years later, these are just as brilliant, sharp, and black and white as probably the day they were printed. And there's the same book in anaglyph. So that's 1876. Now, a book from not from our own collection, and I believe Alexander Klein, who's visiting us today, sent me this picture. This is a book called Impressions of America, which I believe only 100 copies were ever made. And I think this is important because this little wood stereoscope, flat, and there's a little pocket in the back of the book for it and an instruction sheet. I believe this would be the first stereo book to incorporate a separate viewer and a flap in the back, which became a common feature of many books that followed years later. This book, in 1935, Otto Schachenstein in Germany started publishing books that incorporated actual stereoscopic prints. And this one in 1936, the book is in an A4 format, which is, for Americans, that's a little bit taller than 8.5 by 11 size. And there it is, anaglyph. And this is a promotional ROM-build image. So ROM-build is like the German word for a spatial image or a stereo view. And the book incorporates the covers are very thick, and they have pockets in them. And you can see in the lower part of the picture here where my cursor is, that's a viewer, a fold flat viewer. And then there's a pocket where each pocket holds about 25 6 by 13 centimeter stereo prints in the format that you're looking at right now. And here's the same image that I've processed through Stereo Photo Maker into an anaglyph. And this was, again, a promotional picture from it. And they put out a whole series of books. This is from some of their promotional literature from the time. And to me, this is one of my favorite formats because it's literally like having a boxed set of stereo images, but in the form of a book. And they had a wonderful folding viewer made for it. It's very high quality. And in this one, you can see the man putting the book, the viewer over the prints and the page. And there's what the actual viewer looked like. They came in both, usually most were painted black, but some are chrome plated. And during the war, the publication place, they did a lot of, there's a close-up of that. They did a lot of propagandistic type photos with titles, I'll just translate in English, like "The Soldiers of the Fuhrer in the Field," "The Struggle in the West," "Flight and Victory," one on Hitler and Mussolini, and that sort of thing. A lot of the pictures were taken by Heinrich Hoffmann, Hitler's personal photographer, and they used, I believe, like Heidescope or Reliedoscope cameras or Voigtlander stereoflectoscope, German 6 by 13 stereo photo cameras. And this is one of my favorite formats, and I hope Ian will be giving us a presentation in a month or so on this topic. Another book incorporating an incredible viewer design. This was in 1937. There were two books that I know of called At the Zoo and Sailing In, a book, and both stereo books. And you can see the stereo pairs, and I'll show the anaglyph version for those of you that don't have side-by-side viewers. So you see the viewer standing up over the page in a position for viewing the lower pair. And if you look at the bottom edge, this is a square rod that's permanently attached to the back cover of the book. And at the lower, very lower corner here, the square rod changes to round so that it can, if you've slid to that point, the viewer can then be folded flat into the back cover of the book. But while it's in this position, it can be slid from the lower to the upper position, and the viewer itself can flip up or down to turn the page, and it also can be slid up or down on this shaft for focusing. So this was quite elaborate. There are two books that we know of. Their promotional literature lists a third book that nobody seems to have ever seen. And this was published in the USA in 1937. The Viewmaster is another format that there were quite a lot of books that came with Viewmaster reels. A real large number of them were medical books that had medical illustrations in them. There was a whole set done on human anatomy. But the very first book to incorporate Viewmaster reels was called Mushrooms in Their Natural Habitats. And this was probably the most luxurious and elaborate of all of their Viewmaster illustrated books. They never did another format quite like this, where it consisted of 2 volumes. I'm not showing you the book, but the book was a very thick book. And then this is an open box, but when it's closed, it looks like a second volume. And there are 2 openings in it. And the top one was a place for the Model C viewer. And in the lower part was the place for the viewer. And the upper one held this little album that held all of the reels. I think there were 33 reels in the set. And I'll give you a few moments for those of you who want to see it in anaglyph. And this was published in 1949, and it was followed by many, many books that contained Viewmaster reels over the years. Now, I showed you, I can't see you, but if, the Stereo Realist Manual, like I said, this was probably the first book that we got with stereo pairs in it. And this shows it's open to one of the color pages. And that was the lorgnette that was custom designed originally for this book and made by the American Optical Company. But thanks to the fact that somebody paid to have this viewer designed, American Optical offered that viewer for many years. And our company, Real 3D Enterprises, over the years, we sold tens of thousands of these lorgnettes to different companies that were publishing small run books and other books that needed these viewers, which they incorporated into the backs of their books. And this format with a little pocket in the back of the book was also a very popular stereo pair format. Now, in 1976, a book called The Wonders of the Stereoscope came out. I'm not showing the book, but it came in a slipcase, and next to the book itself was another folding folio or album, and this is it opened up, which held on the right side. This was a stack of lithographed stereo views, and then this was a folding plastic viewer that was custom made just for this book. As far as I know, never incorporated into another book. And there it is in anaglyph. That was 1976. And in a way, the format was started to be similar to what was later used by Brian May in his books, and I'll get to that later. All right, now this, in the modern era, this is, well, my German's not great, but Reise ins Land der Three-Dimension, or Journey into the Land of Three Dimension. It was published in Switzerland in 1983. And this is basically a modern update of that book, the Gems of American Scenery from 1876, incorporating a sideways folding viewer incorporated into the back cover of the book, looking at the stereo views that are printed in the same, so that you can view them while they're in the book. And this is important because many, many books copied this format later on. They did two books in this format, another one on trees called the Baumbuch, and both of them used a very high quality, almost dotless screen printing process. And there it is in anaglyph. This, and maybe Alex or someone later can verify for me, from 1983, and I'll just translate. The title is Fascinating Nature in English, and this is, I believe, one of the only books that I'm aware of to incorporate stereo pairs that were printed one above the other, the over-under format. And that viewer that you see there, the KMQ viewer, has prisms with one angled upward and one angled downward. And it's an interesting format. It's not my favorite because in order to fuse the images, you have to be at exactly the right distance. And it's not the most intuitive because it doesn't involve any eye accommodation. You just literally have to be at exactly the right distance to fuse the images. It was also used, we have a very large, one advantage to it though is with the images over under, there's no size limit to the images. We have a very large calendar with images that are, I think, about 16 by 20 each, one above the other. The only caveat being that the larger the image, the farther away you have to be in order to fuse the two using that viewer. Oh, and sorry, here it is in anaglyph. Okay, and then just continuing on into the modern era, this was in 1994, Fish Eyes. There were a whole bunch of, the Japanese really seem to love 3D, and quite a lot of books. I only have one example, but quite a lot of books were published in Japan also using a side-by-side format. And there's a viewer that was made for it, very similar to the one used in the Stereo Realist manual in 1954, 53. And like I said, quite a few books were published with this format. And the viewer was always in a little pocket in the back of the book. Back in America, in 1994, a book called California in Depth came out with all these side-by-side pairs. And this used a viewer made by the Taylor Merchant Company in New York. And this folded flat and again came in a pocket in the back of the book. And the same company later published books on Civil War in 3D. Another significant book in 1995, also published in Japan, was a book called 3D Museum. And again, this is basically the format used in the Swiss book, The Journey in the Land of Three Dimension, and also used in the Gems of American Scenery. But again, I thought this one was important because they used really large lenses, and the format they ended up using became almost an exact copy for quite a large number of books that were published later on. And this is one of those books published in the USA, and you can see how nearly identical it is in layout, even the black printing around where the lenses are, the nose cut out. And this one was called Beneath the Sea in 3D, published in 1997 by Chronicle Press. And Mark Blum was the author, and he did a whole series of books for Chronicle Press, all using this same format. And then quite a few other books, one-offs that were published all over the world, pretty much copied this same format. I don't know if they managed to use the same manufacturer or just copied them. One of the more unusual formats, and again, only one I'm aware of using this format, this was in 1998. The British publisher, Dorland Kindersley, also commonly referred to as DK Publishing, printed a whole series of books that came with this mirror that you see sticking up at you, that you can see at the lower edge. There was a vacuum form pocket in the back of the book that held this mirror. Show the anaglyph version, and you would put your eyes up to it, and the left eye would look at the reflection of the mirror image, left printed image, and your right eye would look directly at the right. And yes, believe it or not, it works. You get a full color 3D image. And they did at least half a dozen books in this format. Then again, quite a few more books were published in that format that I showed you earlier with the book the viewer incorporated into the back. But then in 2009, Brian May, who had a real passion for 3D, we have a lot of members here who are fans of Brian, he came out with a book called A Village Lost and Found. And in order to print it the way he wanted it, in a very high quality, he felt that he needed a viewer, and he designed this viewer that he called the Owl Viewer. And this shows the viewer, and it came in, it would fold flat. Right now it's opened up. But these little tabs here and here and here and here would fold out, and the thing would fold flat and slip into this little slip case. And then that slid into the slip case that held the book next to it. And this is a viewer that you could stand on top of the book and look at. So the format used on a lot of their books was like this, where they would have the stereo view on one side and an enlarged 2D image of it on the other side. And here's an anaglyph of it. And there's a close-up of the viewer. And the other bonus to this viewer is, besides holding it over the book like you see here, it was also designed so you could slip a classic 3.5 by 7-inch stereo card into the book. Into the viewer. So again, many other books have been published. This is just an overview. And since 2009, Brian May, his company, London Stereoscopic, has published a whole series of books in that format. And then they also came out with a smaller version, a handheld version of this viewer called the Owl Light. And that a few of the newer books incorporate that instead of just to be a little bit cheaper to put out. So that's it. I'll stop sharing and come back and see if I can find you guys. There we are. So I just have a few actual items I can pick up and show. Let's and while I'm doing it, actually, are there any questions? Well, let me show a few actual items. So again, even though I was showing you photos. So this is the Gems of American Scenery, White Mountains. And again, this is literally one of my favorites just because it has the viewer incorporated into it. And I can get to one of these pages, beautifully printed stereo views using that process. And then copying that, this is the 3D museum book, which again, had the viewer built in for viewing that way. And then virtually copied by Beneath the Sea in 3D, same format with the viewer and the images on the facing pages. And this is again the Stereo Realist manual, which had the viewer in a pocket in the back of the book. Whoops. Oh, that explains where our Harold Lloyd anaglyph classes went to. And that's the American Optical Lorgnette. And I have to show off, this is a particularly treasured copy because it's signed by Harold Lloyd.
Wow.
Yeah. And also two of the people who are authors in the book. Each chapter is done by a different author. And then last, I'll just show what the actual Village Lost and Found book looked like.
Oh.
Came in a big slipcase.
Yeah.
And the book itself flipped out. So you'd have the book.
Yeah.
And then the viewer was in this folder that came with it, and you would slide the viewer out, snap it together for viewing. So that's a few things. And I'll put in one last plug. I mentioned anaglyph and the disadvantages, but there have been a series of books. I don't know if he's here today. Ron Labby is just a master at making anaglyphs. And this book, which they called In Your Face 3D, the best 3D book ever, I will say for color anaglyphs, it's one of the best anaglyph 3D books I know of. But I do love the side-by-side pair format, and that's the reason for the presentation today. So I thank you all, and if there are any questions, please ask. If I got something wrong, or if you can tell me if there's something like another over-under book I don't know about, I'd love to hear from you.
Well, there are lots of comments.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you so much, David.
You're welcome.
I know I've mentioned this before, but for some people who might not be aware, Rombild and its founder, Otto Schachenstein, he wasn't the Nazi everyone portrays him to be. He was mostly interested in stereography, and he went on to do more A4 books after the war, which have nothing to do with National Socialism and still have quite large in them. So I'm just always, I get a little anxious when people associate him only with Nazism.
Yeah, in fact, the first book he did was Venice, a travelogue, and we're lucky in our collection to have a series of letters from Otto Schachenstein to an American collector who, during that time period of 1936 and later, bought books directly from Germany, and he corresponded with Schachenstein, and all of their correspondence was about stereophotography. And the correspondence continued after the war. The last letter is in the early 50s, and Schachenstein also put out a newsletter called Das Rambild, which was basically a hobbyist newsletter, basically all on the subject of stereophotography. Unfortunately, I don't read German. We have a pretty, I don't know if it's a complete, but quite a lot of collection of them. That someday maybe I'll get translations of them. But yeah, my impression was, like a lot of companies in Germany, they were pretty much got offers they couldn't refuse to work with the Nazi Party, and so they did. They produced a lot of these publications that were fairly propagandistic, but they are historically very interesting, and I'm looking forward to Ian's talk.
Thank you.
Hey, David, I have a question that as a collector, I hate getting this question myself, but I'm going to give it to you anyway.
Sure.
Do you have a favorite out of all those books?
Well, I think I mentioned, I guess if I have to pick one favorite, it's the Gems of White Mountain Scenery. Basically, because it's the first to actually incorporate the viewer into the book, which I think is really significant. Just as a personal thing, we obtained this copy from Paul Wing, who was a major collector, a good friend. So it's a treasured for that reason as well. But even without the provenance of Paul Wing, this would still be my favorite. Although second to that, the Rambild books as a whole are my favorite format because they're actual photographic prints incorporated into the book. The prints are just beautiful. They duplicate and copy beautifully. If any of you have 3D Blu-ray players and are interested, we worked with a company where Susan did high-resolution scans of many of our images for a 3D Blu-ray that ended up being produced called World War II in 3D. And it's still available on Amazon, I think for about $12 or, last time I looked, it wasn't very expensive. And it's not all that, but I'd say about 90% of the images in there were provided by Susan. And it's amazing how well they blow up into, television size images. And it has some other interesting images, color images taken by a French photographer near the end of the war with a Veriscope in color. And anyway, so that's World War II in 3D, available on Blu-ray. But
Cool.
yeah, any other questions?
Yeah, sure. I'll ask one. So David, do you remember which was your first book, and which books are you still hunting for?
Well, yeah, I really don't. I'd say probably one of the first that we got was probably the Stereo Realist Manual, just because, not this particular copy. We've owned a few over the years. But that probably was our first, but I couldn't say for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a part two?
Yes, and which books are you still hunting for?
Oh, well, I've tried to stop. If there was one book I would really love to have, it's a Rambild book called Der Tag der Deutschen Kunst, the Day of German Art, and it was a particular day where the Germans wanted to promote their brand of approved artwork. But what's interesting about it is they actually had a museum display of what they call degenerate art, which was what we would today probably call modern art, by all the banned artists. But they wanted to preserve that stuff and show this, degrading or, degenerate art. But whenever it comes up now, it's at least like $2,500 for the set. And I'm not going to spend that kind of money on a ROM build. But at least thanks to other collectors, we have digital copies of the images. Actually, thanks to Alex Klein. Hi, Alex. He's here today.
David, hello from Spain. And I would like to ask you if you have some link to some information about the books you have shared with us and that you would like to be public, to make public in social networks like Facebook. I think you have a very important information of stereoscopic history that it will be very interesting to be shared in the new generation.
Right. Most of what I showed you today is going to be shared on Stereosite. Pascal's working on it.
It's there in the chat room.
Yeah,
okay.
I don't know if it's there yet. We're still doing a little updating on the. Pascal sent me. This just happened yesterday, so there's a little updating I'd like to do, but it either is, or if it's on Stereosite now, it might be modified a little later. But and also there's my original article, which if anybody wants to email me, I'll happy to send you a PDF of it, and I'll put my email in the chat. Oh, actually, sorry, it's online. The original article is on the the LA 3D Club archive page, and maybe I can send Keita a link to that you can put on.
Well, I think Pascal has put the Stereosite link in the chat room. So it's right. It's one of the last chats. If people go to the chat, you'll see Pascal's link there. So looks like it is up.
I got lost. Oh, all right.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you. Any other questions? No, I don't think somebody asked. I don't think you can save the chat on Google.
You cannot. We can.
Yeah, it's recorded it's included in the recording.
Okay.
I've got a question for you, David.
Yes.
Have you heard of a rock band called Tool?
The number 2? No, I haven't.
Right. I don't know if you can see this. This is the album that they released called 10,000 Days. It's not a book, but it does have a lot of photographic
You know where it is?
with a 3D viewer.
Is this the one Ray Zone did?
Sorry?
Is this the one that Ray Zone did?
No, it's.
He did a similar one for a CD.
Yeah, right. So what we have is what looks like an ordinary album cover, but has a viewer. And it has some photos inside in booklet form. So you've got this lovely abstract sort of design, and there are also standard pictures of the band and so on. And I have to admit, I bought it for the 3D content, but the music is actually, it's pretty intense, shall we say.
Yes.
But I don't know anything much more about it other than that that I can't even remember when I found out about it, but had it for a number of years now, and it's worth getting just for the 3D booklet alone.
Yeah, a few people have written in. They said they think that's the one Ray Zone worked on.
Oh, he did.
I think he won an award for that,
An Emmy.
like an Emmy or something
No,
for
not an
or whatever kind of award for the design. And then there's a question. So yeah, thanks for showing us that. And again, it's that same format as these books. And then there was, I'll segue that into, there's a question from Gordon Howe, that if I were publishing my own full color stereo book, what format would I use? I think tried and true, and it works very well. This format, the same one that originally used in 3D Museum, where the viewer is, sorry, it's hard to see myself in these little tiny things, where the viewer is incorporated in, because it's all there. The viewer's already there, and you can do full color. So I guess if I had a publisher and they were willing to do it, this is probably the format I would choose, rather than a separate little lorgnette stuck into it.
You don't get the publisher.
But it's usually the publisher that makes these decisions. But so if it was for economy, then going with a viewer with sticking one of these in the back of the book. Actually, some of the more recent books have incorporated, I don't know if you're familiar, there's a folding flat cardboard stereo viewer made by Loreo, Loreo, called the Loreo Lite, Lite. And several recent books have included that viewer, which is, I think, even better quality than this. Yeah, and Steve Berezin has a lot of those books. Berezin 3D. And you can find some of them on Amazon, and if they're out of print, some of them are on
Hi, David.
ABA books and whatever. Yes. Oh, hi, Momoko.
Hello. Yeah, I bought a photography Stereoscopic by Dennis Peverin, but on eBay, and then this is that one.
Yeah, actually, we supplied that viewer.
It incorporated the stereo viewer.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was one of our customers. They only printed, I think, about 1,000 copies, and we sold them the viewers.
Yeah. The same. I think the same viewer. So.
It's very clever, yeah, because the way they put it in the cover, where you see the lens in the cover. Yeah.
Yeah.
And on some of these older books, like that book that we don't have, that I borrowed the photo on the Impressions of America book. I think only 100 were published. It's relatively expensive if you can find an original. And I was just curious to just see the book itself, and I found I could get a reprint very cheap. And oh, sorry. Anyway, yeah, you had another book to show. Momoko?
Oh, I have another one.
Yes.
And this is I recently bought the Constellation Books 3D, and the book on the book cover.
Yes.
It has it explained that has incorporated stereo viewer.
Yes.
Like this.
Yeah.
Like this.
So again, it's that same format as the 3D Museum or the Gems of American Scenery.
Yes. So.
And yeah,
they follow the same way.
Yeah.
That's all.
I think there are a lot of 3D books that have been published in Japan that we just never see over here, and one has to really go looking for them if you're not in Japan.
That's why Alex has about.
Yeah.
It's
I think Alex has them all, so that's why he has such a huge collection. Hey,
David.
Yes.
I I was thinking that there was an album you were showing, like a photo album. So from way back where.
Oh, let me go get it.
Oh, I'll get it.
Yeah.
It reminded me of, I have this one called the Stereoscope for the Million from New York. And it has like these postcard views of New York, like the bridge and Niagara Falls, and it's I think it's pretty old. I'm not sure exactly from when, but your album reminded me of, it's sort of the same style of having you know, several photos that you can look at.
Yeah, what time period is that from?
I want to say, I'll have to look it up, but I want to say either late 1800s or early 1900s.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yes. So it's, but yeah, I'll get the info and I'll email you. Yeah.
So again, on the same line, this was a gift from Sid. It's the only one I've ever seen. This is called the 3-Dimension Photo Album. And this was an album for putting your own pictures into.
I love that.
And there it is opened up. And it had a pop-out viewer.
Wow.
And you would paste your images there. I've got one that's sort of in a ROM build format, but the rest is blank. It had a place for you to, with little alignment lines, for you to paste your own pictures into. It had never been used. So it's just a nice, elegant little personal photo album.
Yeah.
For 3D.
Love it. I wonder why that didn't catch on.
I don't know. There's no maker's name in it, so you know. And if obviously more than one was made, but you know, haven't seen another.
Right.
That was a gift from Susan. She surprised me with it. I think at an NSA convention she found it.
I got it from Paul Wing.
Nice.
From Paul Wing, apparently. Yeah.
Sorry, I hit something and got disconnected from you guys.
I could help you get that.
That's
so
okay.
She said, yeah. Anyway, so thank you again. I'm happy to answer more questions. I think we all find it a little interesting. I'm sure we all have at least a couple of 3D books in our collections, and whether anaglyph or side by side, or you know, it's anyway, it's a fun format, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are just dozens and dozens of books that have incorporated side-by-side pairs. And, you know.
Well, feel free, you guys, if you find books, we'll have a show and tell probably in October if you have things of your own, or go ahead and post them on Instagram. I think we're all on Instagram, so it would be great to see those.
David?
Thank you so much, David.
Yes.
Oh, was there another?
David, Bob McAfee here.
Thank you so much, David. Oh, thank you all, guys. I agreed to the meeting room. I'm too sleepy now. Thank you. I'm very happy to see you all. Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank
Thank you for joining.
Bye.
And Bob,
Can you hear me, David?
Yeah.
Okay. So, you know, a couple comments. I may be mistaken, but when you were talking about the Gems of American Scenery, the Bierstadt book, I think that you stated it was published in 1876, which I think is actually the patent date for the viewer design, and the book I believe was published in 1878, but I might be wrong.
Okay. I'm looking at it right now, but yep, you're right about that. 1878.
Yeah, and then the book that I think you said you don't own, First Impressions of American. I don't remember the rest of the title. Is that correct?
It's called Impressions of America by T.C. Porter.
And you say you do not own a copy?
No.
Yeah, there's one for sale on eBay.
I have a reprint of it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's one for sale on eBay right now for $200. The condition looks a little bit iffy, but just for your information.
you know, even it's a good price. And there was one, I don't know if it has the viewer. There was another one I saw that has the viewer and everything. That was, I think, about 350, which 20 years ago, I'd have bought it in a second. But at this point, I'm at a point where we're starting to think of, you know,
downsizing,
selling books from our collections, not buying more.
Yeah,
so
I understand.
I was curious about the book. I was curious about the book itself, so I just bought a cheap reprint, which obviously doesn't have its high quality stereo images, but at least gives me some idea what was in the book.
Mm-hmm. And then you and I have been conversing on 3D photo about another book using the Bierstadt patent for the view. I don't know if you wanted to mention that at all, at least so we're aware now there's at least 2 books that use that format published in the same year.
Yeah. Again, this is a brief history, so I just couldn't mention every single one. And the one you're talking about, I only became aware of recently because of your postings. And it's beautiful.
Maybe he could do a follow-up.
And maybe you could do actually that by itself would be worth a presentation if you want to do one in the future.
Well, I haven't the book, just the paperback reprint, which does not have, unfortunately, stereo views. They just publish one side enlarged.
Yeah, but even just a short one, just from the pictures that show what that album itself looked like,
well,
it's very elaborate. It's very elaborate, and you know, it's an interesting publication. It looks more like that album I showed you, the photo album, but that was done with commercial or pasted in stereo views. But